The words that Penn State fans do not want to hear: long-term injury. One of Penn State's top potential breakout players is going to be sidelined for the foreseeable future.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to Penn State football, and thank you so much for checking out another edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily source for everything Penn State football, wrestling, basketball, recruiting, you name it. My name is Zach Seyko, and I'm your host of the show, credentialed media member for both Penn State football and Penn State wrestling. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us a part of your regular routine. If you're not an everydayer, become one. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast. Friendly invitation to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section, as this is devastating news. Promising defensive end Max Granville has been ruled out long-term, initially reported by 24/7 Sports, but confirmed by James Franklin in a press conference today. We're going to talk about the depth chart, other potential breakout players, because I will say there is at least a silver lining in all of this, not to diminish Max Granville being hurt and not being available for this Penn State team, but as it is not ideal, Penn State does have other potential breakout players behind him. He was just the best option, if that makes sense. So let's get into all of it, right? Max Granville suffers a long-term injury. James Franklin mentioned that it was at a home workout. It was something that happened on break here. And so this was not team organized. Granville's role was going to be rotational because they have Zuriah Fisher. The two starting defensive ends for Penn State are Dennis Sutton on the strong side. Zuriah Fisher was going to be the weak side defensive end. But Max Granville was certainly going to play quite a bit. He was going to be that next defensive end up, probably after Zuriah Fisher. And with what Tom Allen did a season ago and what Jim Knowles was definitely going to do this upcoming season with specialty pass rushing situations, blitz packages, that kind of thing, that's where Granville was really going to be impactful. So it was the overall potential. He enrolled early last year. He went through that redshirt season. He actually saw a bit of playing time in the mid, because you can play some games despite having the red shirt. And he showed early on that he is the real deal and that the sky's the limit. That's why this is so disappointing, is because not only the fact that you have to replace Abdul Carter, so you need all hands on deck. It's not going to be just Zuriah Fisher, even though I do have some promising intel on Zuriah Fisher, but it's going to be a collective effort. Dennis Sutton in conjunction with Zuriah Fisher, Max Granville, and some of these other players that have breakout potential. But Granville was the closest one of having that ability sooner rather than later. He just needed to get situated. He bulked up. He was 200. I think he's over 250 pounds. All of this is a moot point, though. If I had to make a breakout list, I'm trying to define the impact. If I had to make a breakout list of players for Penn State, most impactful, he would have been number 2. Luke Reynolds would be number 1. So Max Granville would have been that overall number 1 defensive player. Luke Reynolds, number 1 overall between both sides of the football. So that is the caliber of player that Penn State is going to be without. He wasn't just a depth piece. This was somebody that was going to contribute and get better as the season went along. And when you have to replace Abdul Carter, you lose Smith Vilbert to the transfer portal. Amin Vanover didn't have the opportunity to come back. This is a big deal, even though Penn State has the resources to somewhat offset it. I think this guy was going to be a focal point in pass rushing situations. Steve Jones talked about this on an episode that we had the chance to talk to him for recently. Go check that out if you happen to have missed it. He kind of gives an overall outlook with the conversation that we had. Granville would have been one of those. Penn State has, you can only have 11 players on the football field at a given time. But Penn State's defense is going to run about 20 to 25 players that would have rotated in frequently. Granville was one of them. This guy was your immediate backup behind Zuriah Fisher, and now they lose that. The long-term injury label. That means most likely that he's out for the season. Don't exactly quote me on it because there is a reason that James Franklin distinguishes long-term versus out for the season. Because in theory, if the recovery goes well, we're here in June. This injury could have happened maybe in the middle of May. Don't quote me on that. That is purely speculation. But it happened over break. Okay, school's been out since the second week of May. If everything goes well in terms of recovery, in theory, he could be back for a hypothetical playoff run. If Penn State's going to play a 17-game schedule, okay. So that's why James Franklin doesn't do that, because in the past, he has said out for the season, knowing that, hey, this is a 8 to 12 month kind of situation. Oh, you're back in 6 to 7. So that's why they say long term, because you don't know. There's so much ambiguity between an injury that you know is significant, it's serious, but you never know how Max Granville is going to recover. This is a tough one. Granville, I mean, like most of his teammates, are well liked, well respected. There was a lot of optimism for him in this second season. You could see it when James Franklin had to talk about Granville, that he was certainly distraught. He was going to be an impact player that was going to get better over the course of the season, somebody that you could rely on in the absence of Abdul Carter, but he's not the only one. So there is the silver lining that we're going to talk about. The depth chart takes a hit, but it just means that everyone else's clock, everyone else's timeline gets a little bit accelerated here. Who should Penn State fans look forward to as that next up-and-coming star at defensive end, or a player that will seriously contribute? We're going to talk about them coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. How does $200 in bonus bets sound? Well, if you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head over to FanDuel.com. Place your first $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. That's right, $200 in bonus bets to use on everything: the NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball. The final series of the NBA playoffs are going on, so you can use that $200 in bonus bets because FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off or even live during the game. You have player props, performance trends, same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Penn State's in the offseason. You want to bet on Penn State football in the offseason? Well, FanDuel has lines posted for Penn State's win total. If you think the team's going to go over 10.5 wins or under 10.5 wins, you can place a wager on that as well. So if you are new to FanDuel, head over to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's talk a little more about this depth chart, because Penn State isn't thin at defensive end, but there's just so much unproven talent. Somebody's got to step up. Max Granville was best suited to do that after the likes of Denai Sutton and Zuriah Fisher. Let me speak to Zuriah Fisher for a moment, because Denai Sutton is viewed as potentially a first-round pick in the NFL draft. I think that's the optimistic outlook. He's somebody that's definitely going to get drafted no later than day 2 just because of potential. He's a former 5-star. Denai Sutton becomes one of the faces of this defense, definitely the face of the defensive line alongside Zane Durant. Zuriah Fisher is somebody that shouldn't be overlooked. And nationally speaking, not a lot of people are going to know Zuriah Fisher's name. Fisher has that confidence within Penn State's program. They see him being more than just a serviceable starter. They see him being an impact player for the entirety of the season. My reservation about Fisher, though, is his longevity. So we're talking about injuries here. Zuriah Fisher has dealt with multiple long-term injuries here that have kept him out for extended periods of time. With the injury to Max Granville, you need him more than ever to have a sustainable season. So Fisher's issue isn't his skill set, his talent. It's about staying on the football field. So as optimistic and hopeful that I want to be and say that, yeah, Fisher's going to be able to play A 17, right? That's the idea, is that Penn State plays a 17 game schedule with regular season, conference championship, college football playoff, right? Everything in between. Zuriah Fisher is extremely talented. He and Enai Dennis Sutton's the better overall defensive end, but I would say DDS is your true best pass rusher. Fisher is not too far behind as long as he's available to play. Penn State has that confidence. I'm going to buy into that as well, that Zuriah Fisher is going to be a name that people recognize more so. And James Franklin reiterated that he doesn't do that on accident. When he has these press conferences and he happens to name drop specifically a player, that is not by accident. That's not lip service. That is truly because he thinks a player is being overlooked or underrated in this process. Zuriah Fisher is getting that credibility. It's everything after that. So Granville was that next man up mentality. He was the best next man up. After that, names that immediately come to mind for me: Yvan Kemajou, true freshman defensive end, strong side defensive end. So he'll be most likely the immediate backup to Enai Dennis Sutton. Remember, it's not just about, oh, there's a collection of defensive ends. One's strong side, the others are weak side. Enai Dennis Sutton is your starting strong side defensive end. Kemajou is your backup strong side defensive end. As a true freshman, they are very high on him. DDS missed spring football. Rest, or probably just didn't want to. If there was an injury involved, right? I don't want to speak and speculate to that, but he was not available for spring football. Kemajou stepped up and then some. He's got the green light. He is going to be one of those rotational players of those 25 co-starters that Steve Jones had talked about, referred to directly. Kemajou is in there. Jaylen Harvey and Mylachi Williams are the ones where you are going to see the pressure put on them, because Granville, Harvey, and Williams are all weak side pass rushing defensive ends. Maybe you see Mylachi Williams move over to the strong side, but those guys were all brought in together as high upside pass rushers, 4-star defensive ends, and they're all redshirt freshmen. Jaylen Harvey, we talked about him quite a bit on the show because what was going on with his recruitment. He was entertaining USC, and then Penn State was able to pull off that recruitment. He becomes that much more important. He is probably going to be the immediate backup to Zuriah Fisher. So there's your 2 deep depth chart. Enai Dennis Sutton, Zuriah Fisher on the weak side, Yvan Kemajou, true freshman, Jaylen Harvey, redshirt freshman, and then Mylachi Williams will probably maybe bounce back and forth between both sides. I like his pass rushing upside, so I see him more as a weak side defensive end, but it doesn't mean he can't play both. So it's all unproven. The talent's there. The talent is there with Penn State's depth at defensive end. It's just unproven. And how do you do that? By playing in games. So these guys have to get reps. These guys have to understand that their roles are going to increase now. And like I said, it's with Abdul Carter moving on to the NFL. You don't have that luxury anymore of a player just simply taking over games. It is going to take a village for Penn State's defensive ends to make up for the production that Abdul Carter did on his own. As talented as Enai Dennis Sutton is, and he can turn into that remotely. I'm just saying for the time being that early on, maybe later in the season, because Jaylen Harvey will get better, Mylachi Williams will get better, Yvan Kemajou will get better as the season progresses. But at that early to middle part of the season, you are going to need a collection of defensive ends, blitz packages to help this defense really get after the quarterback, because Abdul Carter was just so great at doing it by himself. People have been asking me about Enai White. White was brought in through the transfer portal, Texas A&M defensive end, former 5-star, consensus high-end 4-star. This was a top 50 overall prospect, one of the top prospects in the state of Pennsylvania not too long ago. Best case scenario for White. Why I haven't mentioned him to this point? I've mentioned Kemajou, Harvey, Mylachi Williams, guys that are all first and second year players respectively. White's situation is different because he had injuries at Texas A&M, multiple ones. They unfortunately delayed his development. Texas A&M wasn't developing him correctly. They weren't developing him correctly. So a player that has been in college football for now 3 years plus He's going into his 4th season, is behind those guys. I would say best case scenario, and it's not, Enai White can improve. But the intel says that White still has a ways to go, but he is taking steps in the right direction to be better. So his impact is probably reserved for next season. This is a 2-year type of developmental situation. But that doesn't mean he can't rotate in this season. I would put Kemajou, Williams, Harvey all ahead of him. As far as any other players go, James Franklin did mention Mason Robinson at the press conference today. As for a true freshman, somebody like Daniel Jennings, who comes in with college-ready size, but that ability, that know-how, right? That's gonna take some time. I imagine they redshirt him. Other true freshmen, Deshaun Burnett, Cortez Harris, Chaz Coleman, all 4-star defensive ends, kind of like where Harvey, Williams, and Granville were a season ago. So that's what I mean. This room is not thin. You just don't know what to expect. Somebody could emerge. Somebody could step up, but it's going to take reps. It's going to take repetition. So you just need them to step up sooner rather than later when you are in this championship window. We'll continue to look big picture. What are the short-term risks now that Max Granville is out and long-term opportunities for these players that I have mentioned? That's coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Big picture, the short-term concerns that immediately come to mind are the lack of experience, being able to replicate Abdul Carter's impact. I'm not saying anybody has to be Abdul Carter, but you still need a pass rush. You still need to be able to get after the quarterback. And Abdul Carter was already, you could rush 4 defensive linemen. Abdul Carter, Zane Durant, and Devon J. Thomas at defensive tackle, and then Dennis Sutton, those 4, you didn't need the blitz. Well, fortunately for Jim Knowles' defense, where you get creative and everything else, you can have these specialty blitz packages. And that's one of the concerns now is without Granville, how is that going to look? Does somebody have that? Because he was going in when Abdul Carter needed a break. Guess who was going in? Not at defensive end, but as that specialty QB spy, stand up over the center pass rusher. That was Max Granville. So it's more about, it's not really so much about Granville in this instance. It's about what can you do to get a semblance of the pass rush, whether it's collectively or individually, without Abdul Carter. So that's what Jim Knowles has to do in this case. The talent that is there is going to have to grow up real fast. They are going to have to do it. It's a baptism by fire situation now, because where you could kind of ease everybody into a new role, and that goes for Granville as well. But Harvey, Williams, Kemajou, it's now everybody else's timeline gets accelerated, as I've mentioned already. And remember, injuries, Penn State cannot afford another serious injury at defensive end. And that goes for, yes, Zuriah Fisher, who does already carry that concern with him just by proxy because of what he's dealt with over his career. You also cannot afford to lose Jaylen Harvey at this point. Because, like I said, they're in categories. Zuriah Fisher and Dennis Sutton are your guys. They will be able to, at points in time, take over a game. But you take away Granville. If you lose Harvey and or Williams, now that's an issue, and Kemajou as well. So those 4 defensive ends were kind of in this similar break. Potential. Somebody's going to emerge, right? You just take one of them away. If you take another, then you just don't have as many resources. And then you really got to hope. Then you put that pressure on, okay, what do we do with Daniel Jennings? What do we do with any of those other players that I named, Cortez Harris or Chaz Coleman? Do you accelerate them? And probably that's going to be in a difficult situation because most of those guys are projected to redshirt to add the appropriate weight, the skill sets, just bulk up so they can get adjusted to the speed and size of college football. When you're installing a new defense, I've had my optimism that, hey, Jim Knowles doesn't have to reinvent the wheel here like he did at Ohio State. Penn State's been running a 4-2-5, variations of it, fully with Tom Allen, but some of it with going back to Manny Diaz. So you've adjusted progressively. But when you add these wrinkles, when you add these defensive wrinkles from Jim Knowles' playbook, Granville was going to be a part of that, and you just have to make your adjustments. So those are the immediate concerns here, is how does that happen? If we want to look long-term, remain optimistic, is that Penn State is loaded at defensive end. And that's a testament to Deion Barnes. 4-star Max Granville, 4-star Jaylen Harvey, 4-star Mylachi Williams. Daniel Jennings reclassifying. Skips his senior season of football in high school and is ready now. He has college-ready size now. Chaz Coleman, 4-star defensive end. Cortez Harris, 4-star defensive end. Yvan Kemajou, 4-star defensive end, and somebody that's going to play right away. You get Enai White through the transfer portal. So Deion Barnes has really done a good job here and continues to show that he has the ability to recruit. I imagine that Granville will get, and I don't want to frame an injury this way, but he's going to get a medical red shirt. So he's going to have 4 years of eligibility, and he's going to be able, when he returns, he's going to be back with vengeance. Granville's going to have 4 years of eligibility, if I'm correct on this, with the red shirt and then the medical red shirt, that you are taking now a veteran player with 4 years of untapped eligibility going into his 3rd year at Penn State. He's going to be ahead of the curve when it comes to the know-how, the X's and O's, going through the process, working out everything. You're a 3rd-year player with freshman eligibility. So I know that's not the way people would want to talk about this situation probably at the moment, but the return of Max Granville is going to be incredible, to say the least. That is somebody that will be all conference right out of the gate, as long as the recovery goes well, where he will be more than just a rotational player. I imagine that if everything goes well, he starts and he becomes an all-conference, at a minimum, an all-conference caliber player when he is back. So I frame it as, hey, you know, the time, everyone's timeline accelerates. Maybe that's not a bad thing. You get Jaylen Harvey up to speed. You get Mylachi Williams. So when you do lose Enai Dennis Sutton, you lose Zuriah Fisher, you lose Zane Duran. I know he's in the middle at defensive tackle, but when you lose those 4 seniors, you're not going to be in a dire situation where it's not just unproven depth. Now it's proven. You don't have to worry about the unproven part next season. Harvey, Granville, Williams, Kemajou, and everybody else that I've named, they're all going to be better because of this unfortunate circumstance. They're going to get more playing time. They're going to get more reps. They're going to have more attention to detail. So long-term, Penn State's defensive end situation is really good, but you need them now going into this season where they have a championship window. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions, a bonus episode here with breaking news in the offseason surrounding Max Granville's injury. Want to give the realistic outlook here and also the optimistic outlook. Friendly reminder to let me know your thoughts down in the comments section. Thank you so much for being a part of this show. Thank you to the everydayers out there. If you are new to the show, subscribe to the YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcast for the latest daily conversations around Penn State football, recruiting, wrestling, basketball, all right here on Locked On Nittany Lions.